In just 3 minutes, the entire room went silent. A young black congresswoman stood between two American legends, Morgan Freeman and Robert De Niro, and everyone thought she was out of her league. Then she pulled out an old photo, told one story, and everything changed. No yelling, no grandstanding, just one quiet voice that hit harder than any speech. What did she say that made even De Niro fall silent and Freeman look away, lost in thought? Hit that like button, subscribe, and don't blink, because this is the moment power got humbled by True. The Kennedy Center that evening wasn't just dressed in elegance. It was armored in expectation. Every chandelier sparkled like 1,000 eyes watching, judging, remembering. The velvet seats weren't merely for comfort, they were thrones for people who had been told all their lives that their voices shaped the nation. Senators in tuxedos sipped champagne without tasting it. Directors, socialites, journalists, they didn't come for art, they came for control. Everything about the setting whispered one thing: this is where power meets its reflection, not its challenger. Behind the stage curtain, staff rushed silently, adjusting microphones and checking cue cards. Outside, the red carpet was already cooling. The flash of cameras now focused on who might fall, not who might rise. In this space, reputation was currency. You either had it or you didn't. And when Jasmine Crockett's name was read aloud, the air in the room shifted, not with excitement, but with confusion. She walked in with quiet steps, not small ones, but calm and intentional. No bright dress, no flowing cape of ambition, just a fitted black suit, flats, a modest watch, and her natural curls pulled back with precision. There was no forced smile. She didn't nod for approval. Her presence was direct, unfussy, and completely uninvited in the eyes of the room. Murmurs broke out like cold wind. A woman in the third row tilted her head and whispered, "She looks like she got lost on the way to the interns' table." A man nearby chuckled. "Who let her sit here?" No one clapped. There were no warm welcomes, no cameras turned toward her with hope. Phones went up, yes, but only to catch the moment she would make a mistake. Jasmine Crockett wasn't treated like a guest. She was treated like an experiment. As she made her way past the front row, senators who had survived 6 presidencies, media moguls who had buried scandals with one phone call. A few people turned their shoulders slightly away from her path, as if her presence might stain their suits. She sat at the center table, framed between two legends. On her right, Morgan Freeman, composed and quiet, with eyes that seemed carved from history itself. He didn't look at her, not even slightly. On her left, Robert De Niro, sharp-jawed, deadpan, famous for dismantling his opponents in interviews like chess pieces. He tapped his fingers slowly, not impatiently, but rhythmically, as if rehearsing the moment he'd tear her argument apart. Neither man acknowledged her arrival. They didn't need to. Their silence said it all. This wasn't a panel. This was a trial. And Jasmine was seated at the defense table, alone. She didn't flinch. She didn't adjust her mic. She didn't even reach for the water in front of her. Instead, she looked forward, expression calm, hands folded. Not the confidence of someone trying to prove herself, but the quiet of someone who knew she would be doubted and showed up anyway. In a room where every inch of respect had been earned over decades of victories, wealth, and high circles, Jasmine had only her story. And in that moment, it felt like that would never be enough. What no one realized, not Freeman, not De Niro, not the crowd of doubters, was that Jasmine wasn't there to win over the room. She was there to outlast it, and in just a few minutes, the same audience that dismissed her with smirks would be left in stunned silence, watching a young woman tear down decades of ego. Not with volume, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. Truth. The host barely finished his opening remarks when the shift began. He was trying to set a cordial tone, mentioning art, politics, and civic duty. But his words felt hollow in the thick tension that hovered between the 3 figures seated at the center table. No one cared about the preamble. They were waiting for the spark. And then, Robert De Niro moved. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight lean toward his microphone, fingers still tapping in that slow, deliberate rhythm. But the effect was immediate. Every camera in the auditorium shifted toward him, like wolves turning toward the scent of blood. A woman in the back row sat up straight. A journalist pulled out a second phone. A producer near the side stage gave a subtle nod to begin recording. Dyro's voice was smooth, calm, and coated in the kind of authority that only comes from decades of winning. But beneath the surface, there was something cold and cutting. A tone he reserved for people he didn't believe deserved the chair they were sitting in. "Congresswoman," he began, dragging the title like it was a question rather than a fact. "Do you truly believe you're qualified to speak for this country?" The room froze. He wasn't asking a question. He was delivering a judgment, and everyone knew it. Some eyes turned to Jasmine, others to Freeman, waiting to see if he would intervene. But he didn't. In fact, he shifted ever so slightly, not toward Dyro, but toward Jasmine, and spoke, his voice soft but heavy, like the closing of a thick book. "Wisdom," Freeman said without looking at her, "isn't earned by speeches." The blow was silent but thunderous. A wave rippled through the room. Not applause, not outrage, just an eerie, hushed approval. The kind that comes when the powerful reinforce each other's doubt. A few guests smiled knowingly. Others nodded faintly, almost relieved. Relieved that the order of things was still intact. Jasmine didn't move. She didn't blink, didn't reach for her mic, didn't even glance at either man. Her hands remained folded in front of her, elbows barely touching the table. From the outside, she looked passive, even fragile. But up close, if you watched closely enough, you might notice what was happening. She was listening, not just to the words, but to the expectation underneath them. The expectation that she would defend herself. The trap that she would panic. The hope, yes, the hope that she would crack under pressure. Because that's what usually happens, isn't it? The younger one stutters, the newcomer apologizes, the outsider tries to prove they belong. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Instead, she waited, and the longer she said nothing, the more unsettled the room became. A low murmur spread across the back rows. A journalist muttered, "Is she freezing?" Another whispered, "She's out of her depth." Dyro leaned back in his chair, satisfied, as if he had already won the exchange with a single sentence. Even the host cleared his throat, ready to shift the topic, to move past the moment before it became uncomfortable. But it already was. It was deeply uncomfortable, not for Jasmine, but for everyone watching her refuse to play the part they had written for her. She wasn't fighting. She wasn't folding. She was simply waiting. And in that stillness, something terrifying began to happen. The balance of power started to tilt. People didn't know why, but they started to feel it. The sharpness of Dyro's question lingered, but Jasmine's silence cut deeper. Her refusal to rush, to react, to defend, it said something far more dangerous than any soundbite could. "I hear you. I see what this is, and I am not afraid." In that moment, no one was sure what would come next. But whatever it was, it wouldn't be safe. And it definitely wouldn't be what anyone expected. The question hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Dyro had delivered his line with the ease of a man used to applause after a blow. Freeman's quiet reinforcement added weight, turning one insult into two. And now, all eyes shifted to Jasmine, expecting, waiting, for her to respond. But she didn't. Not yet. She just sat there, still and focused. Her eyes didn't dart around the room. Her posture didn't shift. Her breathing was slow, steady, as if she were counting something in her mind. And then it began. 1 second, 2, 3. By the 4th second, a man in the second row leaned over to whisper, "She's choking." Someone nearby stifled a laugh. A younger guest began typing rapidly, already drafting the tweet. "Jasmine Crockett freezes on stage." 5, 6, 7. The silence stretched into something unbearable. Not for her, but for the room. What had started as a pause was now a presence. Even the host glanced nervously at the stage lights, unsure if he should step in, cut the tension, rescue the moment. But he didn't move. 8 seconds. It doesn't sound like much. But when 500 people are holding their breath, when 30 cameras are zoomed in on one woman's face, when the silence feels like a spotlight that burns through skin, 8 seconds is forever. And in those 8 seconds, the room showed its true nature. Smirks began to appear. Arms folded. People exchanged looks, not of surprise, but of confirmation. They thought they were watching a collapse. They thought they were witnessing a failure, live, permanent, and inevitable. But then Jasmine moved. Not much. Just a slow inhale. The kind you take when you're about to say something that costs a part of you to speak aloud. Her hands, still folded, tightened slightly. Her eyes lifted. Not with defiance, not with fear, but with clarity. She leaned slightly forward, no dramatics, no flair, and reached for the microphone. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not because she had said anything, but because the audience felt something they hadn't expected to feel. They felt doubt, not in her, but in themselves. They started to wonder, what if she's not breaking? What if this silence was strategy? And that flicker of thought, that subtle turning of expectation, was all it took for the room to become unsteady. She hadn't even spoken yet, but for the first time that night, it was clear. She would, and when she did, nothing in that room would ever sound the same again. Jasmine didn't raise her voice or rush into defending herself. She simply looked at the two men beside her and then out into the room, as if she was seeing every face clearly for the first time. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm and steady, the kind of voice someone uses when they aren't trying to win an argument, but to tell the truth. She began by thanking both Niro and Freeman, not sarcastically, not with bitterness, but with a genuine softness that surprised the audience. She acknowledged their achievements, their influence, the doors they had opened for others. Some people in the front row shifted in their seats, unsure how to react. Instead of defending herself, she honored them. Then her voice changed slightly, warmer and smaller, like someone opening a door to a memory. She told them she didn't come from political families or private schools. She spoke about her childhood in South Texas, where summers were so hot the metal door handle of her parents' laundromat could burn your hands. She described watching her mother scrub stains from clothes belonging to people who never learned her name, and how Jasmine spent weekends sweeping floors and refilling soap machines. Every dollar they saved went into a jar labeled college. People in the room listened carefully. Some glanced down, suddenly reminded of their own families who had worked in silence, in small places, with small dreams. Then Jasmine reached into her bag, slowly, as if the object inside was fragile. She pulled out an old black and white photograph, edges curled, corners torn. The room leaned forward. It wasn't a prop, not part of a campaign. Just a faded picture of a young black soldier standing in uniform, distant eyes staring somewhere beyond the camera. She held it gently and said, "This is my grandfather, Elijah Bennett." Her voice trembled for the first time, not with fear, but with love. She explained that he fought in World War II. Not many knew his name. He didn't come home to a parade, and there were no medals hanging in their house. He worked quietly, raised a family, and never talked much about war. But one story stayed with him. During a battle near the Belgian border, his unit was hit hard. Smoke, mud, blood everywhere. A white soldier who once called him the N-word was shot in the shoulder and collapsed in the open. Bullets were flying. No one wanted to move. And her grandfather, who had every reason to turn away, crawled toward him, pulled him to safety, and held pressure on the wound until medics arrived. The soldier survived, and before he passed out, he whispered one word: "Thank you." The room went quiet. Not polite quiet, but breathless silence. Freeman lowered his eyes. Niro stopped tapping his fingers. People who had walked in tonight, certain of who deserved respect, suddenly found themselves questioning everything. Jasmine didn't cry. didn't try to dramatize it. She simply said that she grew up with stories like that, not to brag, but to understand what service meant, to understand what dignity looked like when no one was watching. And because of that, she wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to speak for people like her grandfather, people who served a country that didn't always serve them back. In that moment, the audience wasn't judging her anymore. They were remembering. They were feeling. They were listening with something deeper than ears. Jasmine let the photo rest gently on the table, the curled edges slightly trembling from her touch. But her hands were steady. Her voice, though quiet, had begun carving something unshakable into the atmosphere. Not a performance, but a presence. The room was still echoing with the image of her grandfather dragging a wounded soldier through gunfire, rescuing someone who once dehumanized him. That kind of truth doesn't need decoration. It just stays. She could have stopped there. That story alone would have been enough to earn a round of polite nods, maybe even a respectful murmur. But Jasmine wasn't here for polite. She didn't travel from South Texas, climb through rooms where no one held the door, to leave this one unchanged. So she leaned forward. Her eyes no longer sought approval. They searched for accountability. And with the same calm tone she'd held since the beginning, she asked a question that no one, not Niro, not Freeman, not a single person in that hall, saw coming. When, she said slowly, did we decide that only those who've lived the longest are allowed to understand what's right? And that those of us who are young, even if we've seen pain, even if we carry loss, must stay quiet and just listen? The words weren't dramatic. There was no slam of the hand, no raise in pitch, but somehow it hit harder than any shout could have. She wasn't accusing anyone. She was exposing something that lived inside every judgment that had been placed on her since she walked through those doors. The audience didn't shift this time. They froze. Because what she had asked wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't part of a script. It was a direct challenge to the very mindset the room had been built around. Her question pierced the assumption that age is always wisdom, that youth is always noise, and that legacy gives you the right to dismiss those who haven't had decades to build one. Niro didn't speak. He blinked just once, his tapping hand now motionless beside his glass. His jaw tightened, but no words came. Across from her, Freeman's posture softened slightly. He tilted his head, not defensively, but thoughtfully, the way a man does when he realizes a lesson might be unfolding right in front of him. The walls, the ones made of subtle prejudice and rehearsed superiority, didn't crash. They cracked, quietly, undeniably. Jasmine's voice hadn't shaken them by force. She had simply asked the question they were afraid to ask themselves. When did we decide who gets to feel truth, and who only gets to listen to it from the back row? In that pause, the room wasn't just silent. It was exposed. People weren't just thinking about Jasmine anymore. They were thinking about the younger voices they had ignored, about their own children, their students, their interns. All the times they'd dismissed someone not because they were wrong, but because they were young. No one clapped, no one whispered. For the first time all night, no one reached for their phone. They just sat there, listening, breathing, remembering, reconsidering. And for Jasmine, that was enough. Not victory, but visibility. Not applause, but acknowledgement. It was the question no one wanted to answer, and the one they would never forget. Jasmine sat quietly for a moment after asking the question that none of the legends beside her could answer. The weight of silence hung heavy, but it no longer pressed against her. It hovered around everyone else now. The doubters, the powerful, the ones who had entered this room certain that wisdom only wore grey hair and tailored suits. She didn't raise her voice or shift into defense. She didn't list her accomplishments or explain her presence. She didn't try to impress the cameras or win the room. She just let the silence speak, and then gently stepped back into it with a single line. "If I ever lose my conscience," she said, "I will resign." There was no applause, no gasp, just stillness. She wasn't making a speech, she was making a promise. A promise not to them, but to herself. to her grandfather, whose photo still rested near her fingers, to the people who had never sat at tables like this but had bled, served, worked, and sacrificed so that she could. She didn't say it to seem noble. She said it like someone who'd already rehearsed those words late at night, alone, unsure of who would even care. And now, with every light pointed at her, she said it anyway. And that's when the room began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gently, like the first warmth creeping into a room that had been cold for hours. In the second row, a man who'd sat rigid with arms crossed began blinking faster than usual. He didn't wipe his eyes. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tightening. Near the aisle, a woman who hadn't moved since the event began slowly reached into her clutch for a tissue. Not because she wanted to cry, but because she already had. Freeman didn't nod. He didn't speak. But something behind his eyes had softened. His fingers, once clasped tightly under the table, were now resting, palm open. As if he was no longer shielding something. As if he was finally listening. Even Niro, who had opened the evening with the kind of confident precision that could slice through anyone's argument, was still. The silver ring on his hand, once spinning between his thumb and finger, now rested motionless. It wasn't just Jasmine's words that moved the room. It was how little effort she made to be admired. How she didn't reach for applause. How she trusted the truth to carry its own weight. In a world where power often shouts to be heard, she whispered a vow, and it echoed. What she said wasn't crafted for headlines. It was the kind of sentence you remember in the middle of the night. The kind of promise that stays with you not because it dazzled, but because it was real. And for the first time that night, people weren't watching Jasmine Crockett as a young woman trying to earn her place. They were watching someone who had never once tried to steal the spotlight. And somehow, it followed her anyway. The event ended without music, without a standing ovation, and without the usual scramble for photos or interviews. People didn't rush the stage or crowd the exits. They stayed seated, still, holding something. It wasn't disappointment. It wasn't even surprise. It was something deeper. The strange quiet that follows when you realize you've just witnessed something honest in a room built on image. By the next morning, the world had caught up. Morgan Freeman, who had said little since his cryptic remark about wisdom, posted a short message on social media. No hashtags, no links. Just a sentence that spread faster than any clip from the event. Age doesn't always mean wisdom. I forgot that last night, people read it once, then twice. Some were stunned he had admitted it. Others were moved because he didn't dress it up in excuses. The humility in his words, a man who had become a voice of moral authority for generations, was more powerful than any defense he could have made. It wasn't just an apology, it was a reflection. 3 days later, a video appeared from Robert Diro's personal office, wood-paneled, framed with war memorabilia and family photos. The man who had first questioned Jasmine's place at the table now sat in front of the camera without notes, without polish. He stared directly into the lens. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had finally heard what he had refused to see. "I went to the Kennedy Center to challenge her," he said, "and I still disagree with many of her policies. But I'll say this, Jasmine Crockett didn't need my agreement to deserve to be heard. She made me be silent. And in that silence, I found myself again." He paused. "Let the silence speak again," then added, "Maybe what we need more than strong opinions is people who can remind us why we had convictions in the first place." From that moment, the headlines began to shift. Not "Young Congresswoman claps back," not "Niro confronts new voice," but something gentler, more lasting. She didn't fight. She reflected, and we listened. Jasmine herself didn't tweet. She didn't go on a media tour. She didn't ride the wave. On Monday morning, she returned to her office like she always did, answered letters, took calls from her district, read through policy briefings. But everything felt different now, because when she walked down the Capitol steps later that week, she didn't just see cameras, she saw people. An older veteran waiting by the sidewalk, wearing a faded navy cap. A young boy in his mother's arms holding a homemade sign that read, "Keep speaking." An Asian woman stepped forward with no microphone and no phone. Just her hand extended in quiet gratitude. And then the older man stepped forward, white hair, frail frame, trembling hands. He didn't ask for a photo. He didn't give his name. He simply took Jasmine's hand in both of his and said softly, "Your grandfather would be proud. And so am I. Not because you won, but because you didn't back down." Jasmine didn't cry, but her hand didn't let go. She wasn't remembered for delivering a knockout blow. She wasn't remembered for outrage or for spectacle. She was remembered because she walked into a room built to crush her and turned it into a mirror, one that showed everyone who they were and who they could still choose to be. In the end, Jasmine Crockett didn't walk away as a fighter. She walked into history as a reminder that sometimes power isn't what speaks loudest. Sometimes it's the quiet voice, unshaken, unwavering, that changes everything.